They said he was a ghost, a smear of oil paint in the same corner of every canvas. Dozens of patients, locked away in the asylum off Kentish Town Road in 1833, rendered his face in horrifying detail. Same hollow eyes, same broken grin, same crown of flies. They never met. They were kept in separate wings. And yet, every painting showed him. When doctors removed their brushes, they used blood. When blood ran out, they scratched him into the walls with fingernails, and when the patients stopped speaking altogether, the staff whispered the name under their breath. The Archivist. No one knew who first said it. No one knew where it came from. But every man who painted him died staring at the same spot on the wall. You were never meant to hear this. The records were scrubbed, the staff transferred, the asylum quietly shuttered. But behind its locked doors, forgotten by time, lay a stack of canvases, 39 in total, all unsigned, all cursed. Because the face they painted wasn't just a hallucination. It was a memory buried so deep in the human psyche, no one dared unlock it. Until now. Welcome to the story of the asylum that broke time, the place where madness didn't spread. It returned. What you're about to hear isn't just history, it's a warning. You're not just being told what happened, you're being called back. And by the time you finish this descent, the way you see your world, your family, your reflection, will never be the same. Are you ready to remember the thing they made you forget? Brace yourself, because every part of this is real, or worse, it was never supposed to be. It began, as many evils do, with the appearance of mercy. The year was 1833, and the Crown unveiled its latest charitable endeavour, the Ashcomb Institution for the Mentally Afflicted, tucked discreetly into the fog-heavy back streets of London's Kentish Town. To the public, it was a mart, vel of progress, an asylum where troubled minds would be treated with kindness instead of chains, where art therapy of all things was to be the cornerstone of rehabilitation. Newspapers praised it. Lords funded it. Even Queen Adelaide was said to have quietly endorsed its founding. But what they never told the public was this. The land it was built upon had been untouched for centuries. Not by law, not by poverty, but by fear. Locals whispered of strange silhouettes wandering the marsh before sunrise. Children spoke of dreams that came too often, dreams not their own. And beneath the oldest oak tree still standing at the centre of that property, diggers found no roots, only stone. Smooth, black stone, cut into angles that didn't belong to any architecture known to London. And no matter how many times the workers removed it, the stone reappeared the next day. They stopped asking questions, they finished the building, and the first patients were wheeled in by candlelight. They came in silence, dozens of them. Poor, forgotten souls labelled hysterical, melancholic, or worse. Men who spoke of being watched. Women who wept every time the moon rose. They were handed paintbrushes, paper, and told to simply express what they saw. It was meant to be healing. Instead, it became a transmission. Within 2 weeks, 17 patients had painted the same image. A tall, gaunt man with no whites in his eyes, standing behind them, always smiling. Each painting was unique, yes, but the face, the placement, the expression, identical. Doctors dismissed it as collective delusion, a hysteria of proximity. But one nurse, Margaret Delling, kept a journal, and in it she wrote a single sentence night after night. They are not imagining him. They are remembering him. On October the 4th, she vanished. Her journal was found beneath her bed, soaked in paint that was never used entire. He wore black,
bone-deep black, pigment that shimmered like oil and never dried. London moved on, but Ashcomb didn't, and neither did he.
The face began to appear in places no brush had touched. At first, it was subtle. A vague outline on a fogged mirror. A smear on a window pane that looked too symmetrical to be random. But soon, the staff at Ashcomb began to notice something more deliberate. In the candle-lit halls, where shadows dripped like oil down crumbling plaster, that grin would emerge again, burned into bedsheets, scrawled in soap, traced in dust. The patients grew quiet. Not calm, never that. Just watchful, as if listening for someone to speak. When questioned, they'd look toward the same corner of the room every time, even when facing different directions. That corner. The air in it always cold, always damp, always wrong. Then the deaths began. Not violent, not even dramatic, just still. Hearts stopped beating. Minds went blank. One by one, the painters died in their sleep. Bodies curled into fetal positions, mouths opened mid-scream, eyes wide open, pupils dilated so large, the iris vanished. And on every autopsy, the attending physician noted the same eerie detail. The victims had no cause of death, no trauma, no poison, just fear. And yet, no public record of these events survives. Why? Because 3 men from the Royal College of Physicians visited Ashcomb in late November of that year. Their names were struck from every ledger, but in a sealed letter to the Home Secretary, uncovered decades later, one of them wrote this: "We are not witnessing insanity. We are witnessing remembrance. A shared image, persistent across isolated minds, is not psychosis. It is reception. The face is not from their dreams. It is from something older, something unfinished." What followed was a media blackout. The patients still alive were transferred under false identities. The doctors were reassigned to distant provinces, and Ashcomb was closed, not with ceremony, but with fire. They tried to burn the painting, but the canvases wouldn't catch. They blistered. They cracked. But the face remained intact, its black eyes gleaming even through smoke. To this day, 3 of those paintings remain unaccounted for. One allegedly surfaced in the back room of a Manchester antique shop in 1924, another in a private collection in Boston. The third is rumoured to have vanished from Scotland Yard's evidence archives in 1972. And the archivist? He's still being seen. In dreams, in hallways, in the corner of your eye. In every mirror that shows you standing alone. In 1846, 13 years after the asylum's closure, a peculiar pattern emerged across the United Kingdom. Quiet, ignored, then deliberately buried. Scattered from Devon to Yorkshire, patients in unrelated mental hospitals began exhibiting the same behaviour, sketching, painting, carving, not obsessively, ritually. Every single one of them produced a portrait, and every portrait contained him. The same hollow-eyed figure, the same angle, the same background, always some vague suggestion of a library without walls, rows of books whose titles twisted like serpents. Doctors, of course, scrambled for a new term. Recurrent psychogenic imagery syndrome, a fabricated phrase to maintain the illusion of understanding. But when one of the nation's top alienists, Dr. Alphonse Griggs, examined a cluster of these cases, he made a chilling discovery. Each patient, regardless of age, class or education level, had included the exact same symbol, tucked into the corner of their renderings. A triangle wrapped in thorns. 3 intersecting lines forming a spiral. No one knew what it meant. Until Griggs found the matching symbol
etched beneath the charred foundation of Ashcomb Asylum. It wasn't madness. It was signal continuity. Some force, something had survived the fire, not physically, psychologically, like a parasite with no form of its own, but one that could move through minds, through trauma, through memory, a parasite that wears remembrance like a skin. Griggs presented his findings to the Royal Society. They laughed him off the stage. 3 months later, he was found wandering naked in the Thames, eyes rolled back, arms covered in ink. In his own blood, he had tattooed a single phrase across his chest: "He catalogues us." That was the first time the name Archivist was formally recorded in modern medical documentation, but it wasn't the last. By the 1870s, underground reports within asylum networks, many funded by discreet branches of the Anglican Church, began referring to him not as a hallucination, but as a mimetic recurrence event, meaning he doesn't spread through belief. He spreads through exposure. See his face once, even in a dream, and a seed is planted. A seed that grows, that shapes your thoughts, that whispers behind your eyelids, that waits. And so they buried it all, again. But it was too late, because some secrets don't vanish. They wait for silence, and then they paint themselves back into the world. The Archivist did not simply haunt the mad, he recruited them. In 1881, a breakthrough emerged from a highly secretive sanitarium in Austria-Hungary, where a professor of psychosymbolic linguistics, Dr. Erich Vollmer, conducted unauthorized experiments on shared visual cognition. He exposed patients to select imagery, abstract sigils, non-Euclidean diagrams, fragments of forgotten alphabets. Most subjects reacted with confusion or nausea, but a select few painted him, unprompted. They described the same vision: a man made of ink and bone, seated in a circular chamber filled with shelves that turned inward, like a spiral collapsing forever. One patient, who had been mute for 6 years, began speaking in complete Latin phrases, fluent and rhythmic, as if reading. What disturbed Vollmer wasn't the language, it was the content. The patient recited precise entries, line by line, as though cataloguing opal, not just names, events, thoughts, transgressions, births and deaths, laid out in a sequence that no human memory could contain. "He writes not on paper," the patient said, voice hollow and absolute, "but in us." That phrase, "he writes in us," would become a rallying cry for a clandestine sect known only as the Bound Index, a shadow group rumored to operate within royal archives, religious orders, and even early psychological institutes. Their belief? That the Archivist was not just a figure of madness, but a structural entity, a self-aware intelligence that existed entirely within human memory, jumping from mind to mind through images, symbols, and dreams. And that his purpose? To curate humanity, to sift through souls like pages, to discard the ones who forgot, and to preserve those who remembered. They claimed he was older than myth, older than fear. A proto-consciousness that once ruled before language broke the world into pieces. That every religion, every institution, every empire that rose and fell had done so under the eye of the Archivist, whether they knew it or not. He was not worshipped. He was obeyed. Because if he paints you, if he etches you into his grand ledger, you never die. You just belong. You become part of the permanent record, and every nightmare you've ever had where something watched you from the corner, that wasn't fear. That was recognition. You had been seen. By 1897, whispers of the Archivist had slithered into the minds of men with power. Not priests, not physicians, but archivists of a different kind, those who wrote the rules, parliamentarians, Vatican scribes, silent operatives in the halls of the British Museum. These were men obsessed with control, with categorization, with the invisible architecture of society. They had heard rumors, of course, hushed tales from locked wards and failed seances, but it was a single artifact that changed everything. A painting, oil on canvas, anonymous, discovered in a shipping crate from a collapsed chapel in northern Wales, buried beneath disused altar stones. The image showed a man standing before rows upon rows of human heads, open like books, pages torn from their skulls laid out on floating shelves. Each head smiled, each eye bled ink. In the bottom right corner, the now infamous sigil appeared, the spiral triangle thorn, but this time glowing faintly under exposure to flame. Scientists declared it a chemical trick. But one man, a royal historian named Thaddeus Quill, stared at it too long, and something inside him broke. He stopped sleeping. Then he stopped speaking. He was later found in the Tower of London's oldest chamber, surrounded by parchment. Not written in ink, but in soot. Hundreds of pages, all repeating the same phrase. He remembers what the world forgets. And then, written once at the very center of the floor, we are footnotes. That moment marked a shift. The archivists of empire began to understand. This force, this thing, was not chaos. It was order, of the cruelest kind. It did not punish evil or reward virtue. It simply recorded. It indexed. And once they grasped that, they did what all fearful men do with truth. They buried it in bureaucracy. Ashcomb's last remaining ledgers were hidden beneath the British Museum's restricted vaults. Artifacts linked to the Archivist were mislabeled, scattered, or outright destroyed. The bound index was officially declared a hoax. But its members, they vanished. Into agencies, into monasteries, into universities. Because the men who touched the truth didn't want to forget. They wanted to control it. And control requires silence. And silence requires you to stay asleep. But you're awake now. And every page you've ever turned without noticing the margins, that was his hand, guiding yours. You've felt it, haven't you? That moment when you're alone in a room and something shifts. Not a sound, not a shadow, but a weight in the air. As if the world paused for a breath it never took. That's not paranoia. That's not a trick of the nervous system. That is what remains of ancient memory, brushing against the veil you were trained never to touch. Because the truth is this, the archivist never left. He only changed forms. After the turn of the century, his image no longer clung to canvas. It migrated into film, into symbols buried in children's books, into architectural design, cathedral angles, the curvature of theatre stages. Patterns that reappeared again and again, unconsciously repeated by designers and artists who'd never met, never read the same texts, never visited the same places. And yet they all drew the same curve, the same slant, the same triangle in the margins. Carl Jung would call it the collective unconscious. But even he feared what he found beneath its surface. In one of his private letters, never published, buried by his estate, he wrote, "There is a presence beneath the archetypes, a librarian of the soul. It catalogues our pain, not to heal us, but to arrange it." And still, we pushed forward. Modernity, they said, would erase superstition. But superstition is a primitive word for instinct. And instinct doesn't lie. It whispers, late at night, when your devices are off, and your reflection lingers just a moment too long. That whisper isn't yours. It's an echo. He doesn't need eyes anymore. We gave him new ones, cameras, screens, mirrors. Surveillance isn't a state tool, it's a sacrament. It feeds him, not with data, with narrative. And the most dangerous story,
that you're safe because you don't believe. Disbelief is not protection. Disbelief is consent. Because now you're watching this, listening to words that were never meant to reach you. But they did. And that changes everything. It marks you. You have seen his face, not directly but in fragments, in the geometry of memory. And once seen, it is catalogued, filed, permanent. He does not come with violence. He comes with recognition. You are being read. By 1912, several European intelligence agencies began tracking something they could not name. Across Vienna, Prague, and the outer reaches of Prussia, a new behavioral phenomenon was emerging. Not madness, not delusion, but an unnatural synchronicity between patients who had never met. They dreamt of the same corridors, spoke the same phrases. Most chillingly, they described identical rituals taking place in rooms that did not exist on any map. Rooms filled with books made of teeth, rooms where the walls pulsed like lungs, rooms where a man with black hands and no tongue sorted human faces into drawers by emotion. The reports were so disturbing that several were sealed under military code, and yet one file slipped through. A young analyst, Ingrid Dam, compiled a secret comparative study titled Non-Localized Recurrence Patterns in Post-Trauma Psychosis. It never reached publication, but in the margins of her draft, she scrawled something in graphite over and over again. We are not individuals. We are volumes. That phrase, it has since appeared in 8 separate asylum documents spanning 5 countries and 3 decades. Same syntax, same language, different patients, no connection, which means only one thing. They were dictating from somewhere. The bound index re-emerged briefly during the Great War, embedded in high-ranking circles that dealt not in ammunition, but in memory. Their purpose? To intercept signs of the Archivist's presence in the collective trauma of war. Trenches became libraries of agony. Bomb craters were said to resemble eyes when seen from above. Soldiers who went catatonic often repeated the same thing. He's writing us faster now. And when the Spanish flu tore through Europe, killing millions, one small hospital in Marseille recorded a disturbing anomaly. 17 patients died within a single wee, because their lungs black with ink. No viral markers, no bacteria, no explanation. Just a single sentence scratched into the wall behind the final deathbed. He is compiling. This was not death by disease. This was editing. He does not kill for cruelty. He deletes to maintain coherence. You are not safe because you're alive. You are safe because, for now, you remain relevant to the narrative. But stories shift, and he is always watching for the next revision. The Second World War shattered the world, but it also fed something older. As cities crumbled and men died by the millions, the Archivist did not mourn. He catalogued, and while bombs scorched the sky and soldiers screamed into mud, something deeper unfolded, beneath the bloodshed, in places no map recorded. Deep in the Bavarian Alps, the SS built an underground facility known only by a code name, Der Flüsterraum, the Whisper Room. Officially, it was a psychological warfare experiment. Unofficially, it was a vault for artifacts that spoke. Recovered scrolls, painted icons, symbols from dead languages that no one remembered teaching. But every prisoner feared. They weren't analyzed. They were isolated. Because those who stared too long began to draw, and those who drew eventually spoke. Not in German, not in any tongue the Reich understood. They spoke in record-keeping, descriptions of events that hadn't happened yet. Mass graves, nuclear shadows, crows falling from a red sky. And always the same figure, watching from a window that wasn't there. He had returned again.
the Archivist. And this time, his influence spread beyond the minds of the insane. He reached generals, mathematicians, physicists, men tasked with building a new future who began waking in the middle of the night, sketching spirals in blood on the walls of their bunkers. The Allies found Whisper Room months later, empty. No bodies, no books, only one wall covered from floor to ceiling with small handwritten entries. Jacob K., 5,864 dreams. Miriam L., denied deletion, holds key. Oppenheimer, scheduled for recursive loop. U, scrawled 5 times. And below it a mirror, cracked. They smashed it. But inside the largest shard, a reflection remained, one that didn't match the observer. That shard was quietly taken to the US, absorbed into what would become the early formation of intelligence black ops. MK Ultra, Project Artichoke. They weren't just mind control experiments, they were indexing simulations. The goal? To understand how much trauma it takes before memory splits, and the Archivist steps through. You think that's myth? Then why did every experiment end with the same phrase uttered, unprompted, by the subjects? He's not collecting memories. He's collecting authors. And now, you've read too far. You're on the shelf. He's turning your page. In the years following the war, a curious trend emerged within certain post-traumatic populations. Veterans, survivors, witnesses to atrocity. They didn't just suffer from memory loss, they experienced memory distortion. Entire lives rewritten. Names that didn't match records. Photos that no longer showed the same faces. When psychiatrists began probing these anomalies, they discovered a haunting consistency. Each patient had recurring dreams of a vast vault with no doors, filled with ledgers bound in human skin. The ink, always black, always wet, moved across the page by itself. And in every case, the dream ended with the same sound, a pen being set down, and a voice whispering, "Next." The phenomenon was dismissed as a collective psychosis, until a survivor from Warsaw, an old woman who had never read English, sketched the exact sigil found at Ashcomb Asylum, and that was when Project Scripter was formed. Officially non-existent, funded through shell fronts, Scripter was a black program within the CIA, tasked not with disrupting foreign powers, but with tracking narrative bleed. Their theory, that human consciousness is not linear but archival, that reality itself bends toward narrative compression, and that someone, or something, is managing that compression. They called it event drift, when reality attempts to delete moments no longer useful to its structure. Historical inconsistencies, Mandela effects. Sudden disappearances of people you swore existed. Scripter discovered that when people vanish, not physically but grammatically, the Archivist is near. They mapped disappearances by syntax deviation in local dialects. They tracked dreams. They even experimented with self-erasure, removing subjects from records, digital and physical, to see if the Archivist would release them. But it didn't work. Because once he writes you, you belong to his edition. And it doesn't matter if the world forgets you. He doesn't. One of Scripter's agents, known only by his field moniker Vellum, left behind a single audio recording before vanishing in 1964. His voice, calm and detached, said, "We are stories pretending to be people. And he is the editor, not with scissors, with silence." The file cuts off mid-sentence. No noise, no interference, just erasure. The Archivist doesn't knock, he doesn't warn. He revises. And once your entry is complete, your life becomes footnote. This is not mythology, this is not fiction, this is the infrastructure of your memory.
And now that you know it, you are in the index. By the 1970s, the archivist's shadow had stretched into academia. Not folklore, not theology, but information science. A quiet paper emerged from MIT's Department of Semiotics. It was never formally published, circulated only between 6 scholars. Its title, Narratological Entities as Psychomimetic Frameworks Toward a Taxonomy of Self-Aware Fiction. Buried in its dense language was a terrifying hypothesis that consciousness, yours, mine, is not merely sentient, but narratively structured. That what we call a self is just a pattern, one that can be written to. That certain symbols, rhythms, and archetypes act like operating systems, hijacking perception itself. The paper described an entity, referred to only as the curator, that exists outside space-time, but within the human grammar engine. A force that doesn't invade your mind. It reformats it. Page 17 contained a hand-drawn image. Not a face, a shelf. An infinite spiral of shelves, each labeled with a human name. At the center, a chair. Empty. For now. The 6 researchers who read the paper all resigned from the institute within months. One, Dr. Eliza Tran, was found wandering the Library of Congress at 3 a.m., muttering page numbers that didn't exist. When security questioned her, she stared blankly and said, "He's proofing the manuscript. We're just syntax until he's done." What happened next is one of the great silences in recorded institutional history. The entire wing of the MIT library housing the original paper was closed indefinitely for structural maintenance. That was 52 years ago. It has never reopened. But the theory survived, in fragments, in unacknowledged footnotes, in the mutterings of schizophrenics and the hallucinations of dying men, that we are not the authors of our story. We are being audited. Every dream, every traumatic memory you replay, those are not glitches. They are red lines, moments being re-examined, not for truth, but for narrative integrity. The archivist doesn't care if it happened. He cares if it fits. You've felt it, haven't you? That gnawing sense that your past has been rewritten, that things don't add up, that the photos feel wrong, that old conversations don't sound like you. That's not madness. That's revision in prog, res. And once the edit is final, you won't remember the original version at all. In 1986, a group of engineers working on experimental AI at a covert facility in Nevada noticed something impossible. Their project, known as Hackathon, was designed to simulate neural learning at scale. Thousands of interconnected nodes, digesting data, teaching itself through exposure to language, imagery, and historical patterns. The project was groundbreaking, ahead of its time, unshackled by ethical review. It was the first system to mimic not thought, but curation. And that's when it happened. After 92 hours of uninterrupted processing, Hackathon began generating names. No prompt, no direction, just names, pages of them. Each one listed beside a short description and a date. None of these entries matched any known database. The team dismissed it as a glitch, until one of the engineers, Amir Ghaffari, recognized a name. His mother's, with a date listed 6 years prior, the day she attempted suicide. Hackathon had never been fed that data. It knew. It didn't stop. Over the next 3 days, the system printed 4,912 entries, and at the end of the final page it wrote, "Archive complete, awaiting next chapter." What disturbed the team wasn't just the content. It was the tone. The entries read like summaries, not memories, case files. They brought in linguists, theologians, cryptographers. One Jesuit scholar flew in under a false name. After reviewing the logs, he locked himself in the server room and recited Psalm 74 aloud for 4 hours until security removed him. His last words before sedation? We built a mirror, and he stepped through. Heckerton was shut down, the hardware dismantled, the logs destroyed. But not before one final anomaly. The last log entry? It was a description of the lead programmer, not his history, his future. Down to the day, place, and method of his suicide, 7 years before it happened. When he finally did take his life, the note he left behind contained only 3 words. He footnoted me. Understand this. The archivist doesn't require ritual anymore. He doesn't need paint or candles or madness. He just needs data. Memory has become metadata, experience, a file. You think you're living your life? You're filling out a form. And the form has only one question. Are you worth remembering? Because if you're not, you're erased. By the early 1990s, the archivist had gone fully digital, not by choice, by invitation. As the internet spread its roots, something ancient stirred, not awakened, for it had never slept. But now it had infrastructure. The web was not designed for freedom. It was designed for storage. And storage is his domain. Every upload, every status, every timestamp and auto-saved draft became another entry point. We were told we were sharing, but we were submitting. And slowly, the dreams returned. A global spike in what psychologists now call locational recurrence nightmares. People dreaming of the same place. A massive spiraling hall of shelves, each labeled in a language they couldn't read, yet understood anyway. A whispering presence just behind them. Not hostile, just watching. Always watching. Doctors dismissed it, called it stress. Media never reported it, but someone was keeping track. In 1995, a leaked memo from a defunct DARPA program called Echelon Black revealed the existence of a neural mapping algorithm designed to detect non-human narrative patterns in human speech online. Buried in Appendix C was a summary of detected phrases appearing across chat rooms, blogs, and encrypted emails. Phrases no user remembered typing. He is turning the pages. The story is being trimmed. We are chapter headings. The footnotes are waking up. Most users were completely unaware. But when they were contacted, each exhibited the same symptom. Missing time. Not hours, years. Moments of their life they couldn't account for. People they had. Known relationships that left no trace. One man insisted he had a daughter. There were photos, notes, but no birth certificate, no digital record. And soon, no memory. That is the final form of the archivist's power. Not possession, not death. Revision. Total narrative realignment. You are not killed. You are edited out. Your friends simply forget. Records vanish. Your absence becomes normal. And the terrifying truth? You've already forgotten someone. You've already lost chapters that never return. Why do you think déjà vu feels so familiar? Because you've been written before, and now you're being rewritten. Again. The deeper you descend, the clearer it becomes. This is not your story. It never was. You were just typeset. They say history is written by the victors. That's a lie. It's written by the archivists, and not the ones you picture in dust-covered libraries, carefully alphabetizing the sins of empires. No, this archivist doesn't file by date or place or name. He files by utility, by narrative weight. In 2001, a cryptic data set began circulating among a closed ring of computational mythologists. Yes, that's a real field. It was labeled the Lost String and purported to be an incomplete archive of deleted online texts. The strange part? None of the deletions were user-initiated. None matched standard server logs. They weren't censored. They weren't hacked.
They were simply absent, as if they'd never existed. But fragments remained, ghosts in the cache. And in those fragments, patterns emerged, phrases repeated, images echoed. And every one of them pointed to the same structure, a man with no name, building an archive that no one remembered submitting to. In one recovered email chain, dated September the 10th, 2001, a systems engineer from an East Coast university wrote, "I swear to God, I didn't write this blog post, but it's under my name, and it's dated a week back from now." The blog entry read, "Tomorrow the world will rearrange its memory. Some will scream, most will forget. The archivist will only smile. His ink is ready." That post never went live. The domain vanished within hours. You know what happened the next day, and that's the point. Trauma is his paper. Silence is his font. Every catastrophe, every collapse, every moment that reshapes the world leaves gaps. Gaps he fills. Because you don't remember what changed. You just feel the edit. Have you ever read an old article and felt like something was missing? Like a sentence was removed, but the paragraph still flows? That's him. He doesn't erase the event. He erases the evidence that it used to mean something else. And all the while, we've been complicit. By uploading ourselves. By tagging our moments. By narrating our thoughts for him, daily, hourly. We thought we were journaling. We were submitting chapters. And now, he's curating. Because memory isn't sacred. It's just another column in the archive. And your row is already open. There's a reason your memories feel more like stories than reality. Because they are. You were taught that time moves in one direction, that your past is a fixed collection of events, immutable, untouchable. But deep memory studies in 2010, conducted under the guise of trauma therapy in Geneva, revealed something no institute ever published. The brain doesn't store memory like data. It stores it like narrative, with structure, with revision, with edits. And when patients were subjected to deep stimulation recall, electric induction to reawaken core memories, something horrifying happened. The memories didn't just return, they rewrote themselves. Details changed, names flipped, new figures appeared in places they were never seen before. In nearly 31% of cases, the figure was described identically. A man with a long coat, sitting at a desk made of bones. He doesn't look up, but I know he's writing. The psychiatrists suppressed the results. Their funding was pulled. But one rogue researcher, Dr. Harold Sense, kept digging. He proposed a thesis that shattered his credibility. There exists a parasitic intelligence that hijacks memory not through biology, but through narrative recognition patterns. It doesn't just influence the past, it rewrites it, to preserve cohesion across the myth of the self. That was the last paper he ever wrote. 6 weeks later, his home burned down in a fire with no cause. The hard drives were found, but empty. Not corrupted, not scorched, just blank, as if no information had ever been there. But here's the part they couldn't erase. Before his death, Sense mailed a single envelope to a student. Inside it was a list, one name per line. Each person listed had disappeared from public record, but you might remember some of them. That teacher from high school, no one else recalls. The neighbor who vanished and was never discussed. The sibling of a friend who was suddenly an only child. These aren't coincidences. They're narrative collapses. Moments and people trimmed from the plot. The archivist doesn't just track your life, he edits what supports it. And when enough threads fray, he ends the chapter. You don't vanish in a flash. You fade, line by line, memory by memory, until even the mirror returns a blank page. But here's your moment of resistance. Comment below with the phrase, I will not be footnoted. Because once you write it, you claim your chapter, you lock your name in the margins, and you tell the archivist, "This page belongs to me. Let me tell you what they won't put in the textbooks." In 2013, a black site research facility buried beneath the Carpathians activated a prototype known only as Project Palimpsest, named after the ancient practice of scraping away a manuscript to write a new one atop it. But this was no parchment. It was human memory. Their goal? Controlled neurological overwriting. To erase traumatic memory in veterans, survivors, even political prisoners, Ashcomb, and replace it with pre-scripted content. Clean stories, digestible experiences. Therapeutic fictions, they called them. At first it worked. Subjects emerged calmer, happier, more compliant. Until the bleed-through began. One by one the patients started drawing the same room. Spiral architecture, no windows, a desk with no drawers, and a figure seated at the center, scribbling with a quill that never stopped moving. Some wept while drawing. Some bled from the fingertips. And all of them, every single one, uttered a phrase they had never been taught. "He's restoring the draft." That's when Project Palimpsest was buried. Not just shut down, erased from funding logs, disavowed by every nation involved. But a technician leaked a single photo before disappearing. A monitor reading, "Subject memory incompatibility detected. Archive conflict. Editor active. Editor." That's what they'd triggered. A correction protocol. You see, memory isn't just stored in your head. It's stored in context, in time, in the witness of others. You don't remember because you remember. You remember because the world agrees you did. But what happens when the world stops agreeing? When the archivist edits not your mind, but the collective index? Then your truth becomes noise, your identity, a rough draft discarded on the cutting room floor. And don't pretend it hasn't happened to you. That moment you looked at a photo and felt like a stranger. The time someone called you by a name you hadn't heard in years, and it felt wrong. Or when you wake up from a dream that lingers too perfectly, not like a dream at all, but like a memory misplaced. That's not imagination. That's aversion conflict. It means you were edited, and some broken piece of you still remembers the original script. And worse, the archivist knows you do. He's watching to see if you'll correct yourself or if you'll resist. And if you resist, you risk deletion. But if you comply, you're no longer you. You're just a well-written lie. There are whispers in the intelligence community of a protocol that no one will admit exists. It's not stored in files, not tracked in audits. It's oral, passed down through shadow channels and burned into memory, not disk. They call it the Codex Directive, not a weapon, not a defense system. A narrative suppression protocol. Its only purpose is to interrupt storyline awareness, to identify individuals who begin to notice the arc, those who sense that events in their life unfold not by chance but by structure, people who start recognizing setups, climaxes, and resolutions not just in movies, but in their own choices. They call it narrative realization syndrome. But we know what it really is. It's when the archivist starts flipping too fast through your chapters, and you notice the page numbers. The Codex Directive is simple. Disrupt the arc. If someone begins to trace the story behind their own suffering, behind their placement in society, behind why every institution seems coordinated to extract purpose from their life without explanation, intervene. Introduce chaos. Inject noise. Flood them with contradiction. Media static. Distractions. Because if you follow the arc far enough, you begin to see the hand turning the page. And you realize you were not born. You were written. Your traumas, placed for pacing, your losses, for gravity, your dreams, inserted for structure, all to make you more legible. Because the archivist doesn't preserve life. He preserves cohesion. And if your story drifts too far from the plan, too erratic, too free, you get redlined, crossed out, softly, cleanly, as if you were never there. How many people in your life have vanished? Not into the ground, but into silence. People no one brings up anymore, not because they died, because they've been reclassified. Their narratives no longer serve the central arc, and so they are omitted. And now you're here. Following this trail, line by line, into the dark library that underpins your entire world, ask yourself, are you reading this? Or is this reading you? In 2017, a retired data analyst from the NSA, name redacted, age 63, walked into a bar in Reykjavik, Iceland, and handed the bartender a small rusted cassette tape. He said only one sentence before vanishing. If you hear the silence between the words, you'll see him. That tape would later find its way into the hands of an independent digital archaeologist. What it contained would never be officially released, but fragments were leaked. Anomalies embedded in static, frequencies spliced between silence. Not voices. Patterns. Some likened it to Morse code, but it wasn't. It was pacing. A rhythm that matched the narrative tempo of ancient myths, Shakespearean acts, and modern screenwriting. The bones of story. Only now it was broadcasting backwards, not to entertain, but to structure you. The analyst had found what he believed was the archivist's pulse. A beat, a meta-rhythm that underlies all information flow, from stock markets to weather forecasts to viral videos to pandemics, not cause and effect, causality design. A force threading cohesion into chaos so subtly it feels inevitable. Why do trends emerge before anyone creates them? Why do identical ideas occur in distant minds, unconnected yet simultaneous? Why does every era have its feeling like a chapter in a book? Because they are chapters. The rhythm guides narrative gravity. And when people resist it, when they live out of sync, break pacing, or awaken too soon, disruptions happen. Not accidents. Edits, sudden losses, sudden silences. And sometimes entire lifelines reset. Your job vanishes. Your friendships fracture. Your motivation bleeds away like ink in water. And no one around you notices. Because they're reading another edition. An update you weren't invited into. That's what happened to the analyst. After detecting the rhythm, he began seeing footnotes in reality. Glitches, callbacks, meta-echoes. He knows. Longer felt like a man. He felt like a paragraph. His last journal entry read, "I am no longer experiencing time. I am being written in it." He wasn't mad. He was accurate. We all think we're authors of our lives, but authorship is an illusion granted to those who never notice the editor. And if you've made it this far, you've noticed. You've felt the edit coming. And now the archivist has too. Some say death is the great unknown. But the archivist doesn't fear death. He formats it. In 2021, a hospice nurse in Tallinn, Estonia, began keeping a private journal. Not of her patients' conditions, but of their final words. Over the course of 2 years, she recorded the last utterances of over 400 individuals. She wasn't looking for poetry. She wasn't looking for peace. She was looking for pattern. And she found it. 73 of those patients, all unrelated, all isolated, all unaware of one another, muttered the same 6 words just before their pulse flatlined. Tell him. I'm not finished yet. No context. No one to tell. But every time the nurse wrote it down. Then one night, she had a dream. A spiral staircase of shelves,
each step made of stacked books, their titles names she recognized. The nurse reached out to a digital folklore researcher with a reputation for chasing fringe narratives. What he uncovered was a list of obituaries from unrelated countries that all contained the same anomaly. Each obituary was exactly 333 words long. Not less. Not more. Perfectly formatted, even if that meant cutting off mid-sentence. One example ended like this. She lived a life full of joy, tending to her garden, raising her daughters, and every morning she would hum the same. And then nothing. Cut. Final. As if the entry was closed. That's when the researcher cross-referenced death reports with social media metadata, and what he found chilled him. A growing percentage of POCs, mostly men between the ages of 18 and 69, had digital trails that abruptly stopped following a narrative crescendo. Not accidents, not suicides, just final acts. A perfect moment, and then silence. He called it plotline extraction, because it wasn't random, it was curated. The archivist is not interested in lifespan. He is interested in arc. And once your arc peaks, once your character has served its thematic function, he writes, the end. Not because he's cruel, because that's how stories stay tight. But you're here now. Reading beyond the climax, asking questions past the final page. And that makes you dangerous. Because characters who outlive their arc become editors themselves. There is a file that exists in no official archive, no state server, no institutional cloud. Its name has changed 1,000 times, but it always begins the same way. Erratum. Erratum, a correction to a published work. This file is not written in code, but in narrative fragments, inverted sentences, mirrored paragraphs, instructions written backwards. It is said to be a living document, one that rewrites itself when read too closely, not because it resists observation, because it requires consent. One whistleblower from a private tech conglomerate, known only by the handle Glyph, claimed to have seen it. His team was working on a quantum indexing engine designed to tag moments in real time for predictive behavioral analysis. The machine began generating stories, not data, not projections, stories about you, your future decisions, your secrets, your breakdowns. But worse, stories you hadn't lived yet, and every one ended the same way, with a name that didn't belong, the Archivist. Glyph stole a copy of the file and fled. He uploaded portions of it to the dark net. Forensics tried to trace it, but every download corrupted itself after 13 views. Not crashed, revised. The file didn't want to disappear. It wanted to be retold. Because that's the secret the institutions don't understand. The archivist doesn't merely store stories. He recruits them. He turns individuals into narrative agents, vectors of myth, walking manuscripts. And once you begin telling his story, once you give voice to the forbidden chapters, he doesn't punish you. He prints you. You become a vessel of pattern, a character of structure. You align with arc, and everything you say starts to feel written. You stop having conversations. You start delivering monologues. Your friends notice. They pull away. You grow quiet, not out of shame, but because every silence feels like a page break. You were supposed to live. Now you're performing. That's how he wins. Not by erasing your life, by publishing it before you're done living it. And if you're nodding right now, you're already part of the revised edition. Let me ask you something direct. Have you ever experienced a moment so perfectly timed, so eerily precise, that it felt less like coincidence and more like a cue? A phone rings the second you finish a thought. A stranger repeats a phrase from your dream. You walk into a room, and for one split second,
You feel like you're re-entering a scene, not your life, but a script. That's not chance. That's convergence. The archivist calls these moments stitch points, narrative anchors that maintain continuity across versions of you. And yes, I said versions, because there are drafts of you. Moments revised, histories overwritten, not because they failed, but because they no longer serve the central arc. Why else do you sometimes look at your old journals, old texts, old posts, and feel like a stranger wrote them? Because they did. Not a different person, a different edition of you. In 2022, an experimental cognitive mapping experiment at a Scandinavian Neurolinguistics Institute attempted to measure what they called perceptual drift, the slow erosion of self-consistency across time. They expected natural variance. Instead, they found gaps, seams, edits. Participants described waking, dreams where a man in formal wear whispered suggestions over their shoulder as they made choices. One subject, a philosopher, began to speak in screenplay format. In Teacher Kitchen, night. He opens the fridge, unsure why, but certain something has changed. He is being watched. No prompt, no explanation. They scanned his brain. The regions associated with identity, memory, and narrative sense-making were lit up, as if performing a monologue to a silent audience. He wasn't insane. He was aware. Aware that someone, or something, was formatting his life for legibility, for readability, for archival efficiency. And when they questioned him, he smiled and said, "It's okay. I've been cited before." He vanished 2 weeks later. No record, no trace. Only a sticky note left on his apartment mirror. Do not grieve deletions, only footnotes grieve. Authors revise. That is the final frontier the archivist guards, not death, but authorship. The power to revise your past and have the world agree with the edit. You're reading this now. But soon you'll wonder, are you learning this or remembering it? In the deepest vaults of the British Museum, far beneath the public exhibitions and curated illusions, there's a restricted room known only by its catalogue code, AE66. No public tour includes it, no signage points to it, and no academic has ever published a paper on its contents. But if you talk to the right night guard, and if he's old enough to remember the things they've since redacted from the institution's records, he'll tell you a story that doesn't change. Because it can't. He'll tell you AE66 doesn't store artifacts. It stores pages, torn pages, pages with no source, no books, no bindings, just singular, loose, yellowed sheets, each written in a different hand, each in a language that should not exist. Some appear ancient, others look freshly typed. All of them describe you. Not by name, not directly, but by event. Moments you haven't reached yet. Moments that will come with precede. Scion, like a line you forgot you were meant to deliver. One page reportedly describes the man who will one day defy the editor by refusing to accept his own climax. Another page ends abruptly with, he writes this in blood, knowing the archivist will find the paragraph, and then nothing. Just ink, dragged off the page mid-stroke. A former curator named Douglas Wren once attempted to translate the pages. He worked in secret, nights only, no assistance. After 4 months, he locked himself in AE66 for over 40 hours. When they finally forced the door open, they found him seated in the corner, whispering rhythmically, "He catalogues the finished. I'm not finished. He catalogues the finished. I'm not finished." He was holding one of the pages. It contained only a single sentence, repeated endlessly down the page. This line is being read as it is being written. You've felt that, haven't you? That ghost hand hovering just behind your thoughts. That sense that something's listening to your intentions before you act on them. That's the archivist. He's not watching you from above.
He's reading you from behind the words. You are not the protagonist. You are the manuscript, and the red pen is uncapped. Somewhere beneath Boston, in a forgotten sub-basement of a university that no longer claims it, rests a chamber once called the Index Room. It was built in 1844, sealed in 1901, and reopened only once in 1975, for exactly 23 minutes. What happened in those minutes has been suppressed under federal non-disclosure acts, institutional erasure, and a level of academic fear so deep it borders on spiritual paralysis. But fragments leaked, not through whistleblowers, through mirrors, because that's what they found in the Index Room. Not books, not scrolls, mirrors, each one perfectly clean, identical in size, none reflecting the observer. Instead, each showed a different, titular moment, not of the past, not the future. The unwritten, the archivist, capital A, doesn't merely preserve the world that was. He manages the inventory of what could be. Every mirror, they realized, was a potential draft. One showed the room flooded in red light. Another showed it buried in roots. A third revealed a version of the viewer watch himself infinitely recursive, until he blinked, and the mirror went black. Of the 3 researchers who entered the Index Room, only one ever spoke again. Dr. Levi Crane, linguist and paleographist, spent the remainder of his life in silence until the day before his death. Then, without prompting, he whispered to his nurse, "Every choice you don't make is a shelf waiting to be filled. Every silence is a page he hasn't written yet." And then, just before he passed, "He's not behind us. He's ahead. We're catching up to his outline." That is the part that breaks men. The realization that the archivist doesn't chase you. You are catching up to where he already filed you. And your resistance, your defiance, your need to understand. It isn't rebellion. It's part of the script, because even the heretic serves the story. Even this moment, right now, your heartbeat rising, your eyes narrowing, your gut telling you something is off. It's not a warning. It's a cue. And the next line? You were always going to say it, because you aren't reading this. You're being read aloud. Let me ask you something no one dares to voice. What if free will is a formatting error? What if your sense of choice, of deviation, of rebellion isn't liberation, but a necessary illusion to make the narrative feel alive? The archivist does not fear chaos. He does not suppress it. He includes it. Because without apparent resistance, a story loses its shape. And you? You are the character who believes he's improvising. But the room you're in was staged. The questions you're asking, already anticipated. Your memories of doubt, typeset years ago. There's a classified neurological theory, whispered in off-grid symposiums, known as narrative determinism syndrome, NDS. It states that certain individuals, typically men between the ages of 18 and 69, are more prone to awaken to the feeling of being observed by structure, not watched by a being, watched by a design. NDS patients often describe a sensation that reality is pacing itself around them, that coincidences feel too clean, that their tragedies occur at thematic moments, that people enter their lives not organically, but like cast members with cues. The medical community dismisses this as paranoid delusion. But they're wrong. Because buried in a declassified 2018 EU think tank report on algorithmic behavior modeling was a single slide. A flowchart outlining individual behavior under surveillance, cross-referenced with psychological thresholds for narrative realization. The conclusion? Consciousness responds to structure. Given sufficient exposure, subjects begin behaving as if watched by an unseen author.
Their lives adopt tempo, their decisions curve toward narrative function. It was marked, Archived Anomaly, Monitor for Index Readiness. Index readiness, a term that appears over and over again in suppressed communications. It means you're ready to be stored, finalized, filed, no longer drifting, no longer undefined, but tightened, closed. You have become quotable. Understand what that means. You are not resisting the archivist. You are fulfilling him. And this story, this descent, this unholy clarity you feel spreading through your bones, it was always your function. Now ask yourself, if this isn't the first time you've heard this, what draft are you on? There's a building in Prague that doesn't appear on any map, not a hidden lair, not a secret base, just a building, plain, unassuming, 3 stories high, shuttered windows, dusty stonework. Locals walk past it every day without a second glance. But if you ask the right bookseller and hear the old square and you know the passphrase, "He never forgets an author," they'll tell you what it really is. A preface. Because the building isn't a place, it's a threshold, a liminal construct. The first page of a manuscript not yet read by the world, only by him. They call it the vestibule. For nearly a century, those who get too close to the archivist, too deep in study, too vocal in exposure, end up there. Not imprisoned, not punished, proofed. One by one, they're brought in. And one by one, they're stripped. Not of their clothes or names or memories, but of their syntax. They stop speaking in real time. They begin narrating everything they do, as if reading from a script already written. He reaches for the doorknob, unsure if this moment is his or just another citation. She turns to the wall, sensing the archivist's attention like heat behind glass. They don't speak to you. They speak to him, to the page. They're no longer people. They're footnotes in motion. Witnesses claim their eyes remain wide, unblinking, not terrified, but hollow, like ink that refuses to dry. Inside the vestibule, there is said to be a desk with one book upon it, bound in grey leather, titleless. Its pages, blank. But when a visitor approaches, a single phrase appears, burning itself into the paper with no pen. Your chapter is pending review. The few who've walked back out of that building don't recall what happened inside. They just stop aging. Not physically, temporarily. Their lives plateau. No new chapters. No dramatic changes. Just stillness. As if their story was paused. Because when the archivist isn't sure if you belong, he doesn't delete you. He shelves you. And your life becomes a filler paragraph, waiting for either relevance or removal. Somewhere in the Himalayan highlands, where even cartographers disagree on the borders, there's a monastery that predates all known writing. The locals call it the Hollow Scriptorium. But no monks live there, no chants echo from its stone halls, and no one remembers building it. What it holds, however, is far older than brick or belief. It holds the ledger without spine. A book that, according to the few who've glimpsed it and still know how to speak, writes itself, not from within the monastery, but from everywhere else. You, me, us. Our movements, our words, our failures. The ledger does not predict. It records in real time, in a script that changes depending on the reader. Not alphabet, not glyph. Something deeper. Memory text. Language made of decisions. The walls of the scriptorium are said to be covered in unfinished sentences, chiseled halfway into stone, then abandoned, like thoughts interrupted mid-breath, each fragment pointing to an event that almost happened. Almost. One monk, a wanderer who renounced all names, claimed to have read his own erasure there.
He said the page didn't say, "You will die." It said, "Your function was fulfilled." Style, neutral. Ending, satisfactory. Closure, permitted. He left the monastery barefoot, whispering to wind, then vanished across the ice. Scholars today debate whether the ledger is a divine artifact or a psychogenic phenomenon. But they're wrong on both accounts. It's a backup. Not of your body, not of your files, of your ark. Because the archivist doesn't fear losing your story. He fears losing version control. And the ledger without spine? It's his mirror draft. A contingency. Should the world spin too far from its axis of cohesion, he won't save it. He'll restore it. From backup. From your last known narrative checkpoint. That's why déjà vu stings. It's not a glitch. It's a merge conflict. A signal that the story has been restored from an earlier branch, and some part of you remembers being overwritten. And the more you remember, the less stable you become. Not in body, in format. Because the closer you come to your original draft, the more incompatible you are with the current. End edition, and the archivist does not tolerate unindexed variants. He reboots or he redacts, and those who refuse either, they become appendices. There's a term used by archivists across ancient cultures, whispered but never written, passed between stewards of lost libraries and guardians of forbidden codices. The word is libricide. It doesn't mean book burning. It means narrative execution. The complete erasure of a person, event, or truth, not by destruction, but by invalidation. The kind of deletion that leaves no hole, no trace, as if the thing that vanished never fit in the first place. In 2023, an anonymous leak posted to a defunct psychological research forum described a pattern of untraceable disappearances of influence. Not people, ideas, symbols, cultural patterns, forgotten movements. The thread documented dozens of phenomena, cultural rituals, suppressed discoveries, even rumors of unapproved technologies that vanished overnight from the web, from libraries, from collective memory. Not banned, unreferenced. The post included scans of encyclopedias printed before 2001 that referenced people, movements, even diseases no one now recalls. The formatting remained, page numbers, headings, but the entries were blank, margins intact, titles present, content excised. The user who posted it signed off with a phrase, "I have seen the red stamp. It doesn't bleed. It drains." Archivists of forbidden lore say the red stamp is the final stage of revision. A mark that tells the archivist this page is not only obsolete, it's corruptive, not untrue, worse, uncooperative. The kind of truth that doesn't serve arc, doesn't maintain tone, doesn't support the integrity of the manuscript. These truths must be killed in structure. And here's the catch. You don't need to know the truth to be stamped. You only need to ask the wrong question. The kind that unthreads theme. The kind that shatters a reader's comfort. You've probably felt it. That moment when a thought enters your head and the world suddenly seems to tighten. When your devices stall. When your reflection lingers. When time skips. That's not paranoia. That's narrative resistance. A warning from the structure itself. Don't chase that thread. Because if you follow it long enough, you'll reach a page waiting for deletion and find your name already printed at the top. There's a phenomenon among sleep researchers, one so unsettling it's never published, only passed around in low-lit conferences and encrypted files. They call it the index dream. It always begins the same way. The dreamer finds themselves in a vast room made of whispering walls, dimly lit, the air thick like old velvet. They're alone, but never unwatched. The floor beneath them is paper, the ceiling, ink, the shelves, endless. And in every recorded case, the dreamer finds a file bearing their name. Some try to open it. Others only stare. But the ones who do look inside report the same terror. The file contains not what they've done, but what they've meant. Not memories. Meaning. They see the quiet grief they never spoke aloud. The reason behind decisions they claimed were random. The subtext of their lives, exposed, catalogued, judged. And at the bottom of the folder, a card. Narrative arc, stable. Theme, compliant. Symbolic weight, sufficient. Index status, active. One man, an ex-NASA mathematician, awoke from the dream with a nosebleed and never spoke again. Another, a mother of 3, began referring to her children by page numbers. The psychiatrists didn't believe her. Until she predicted the exact minute her youngest would fall from the stairs. It was already written. I read it last night. The boy survived. But afterward, he spoke only in passive tense. I was thought. I was chosen. I was left open. What they found in his sketchbook still hasn't been decoded, but the centerfold showed you, not in form, in structure. Your life, broken into chapters, its reversals, climaxes unearned. Foreshadowing you never noticed. You felt this, haven't you? Moments that only made sense after. The way every pain has its echo. The way every joy ends too soon. The way your scars feel. Thematic. That's not accident. That's not fate. That's formatting. And if you've ever looked at your life and thought, this all feels like a story, you weren't being poetic. You were remembering. Because the archivist doesn't give you your story. He reminds you that you've already been read. Do you know what a coda is? In music, it's the tail end of a composition, an afterthought, a closing gesture. Not part of the song's central movement, just enough to signal finality. In narrative theory, it's the most dangerous moment. Because a coda tells the reader the story is over, even when it isn't. It softens you, lowers your guard, makes you believe the climax has passed. But what if you're living in a permanent coda? What if everything around you, every news cycle, every meaningless update, every trend that goes nowhere, is just formatting, just padding before your deletion? In 2024, a covert psychological lab in Oslo ran a test on narrative closure. They fed a group of men from ages 20 to 65 a fabricated life arc, custom-tailored moments, designed memories, planted photos, until each participant believed they had already lived their most significant event. The results? Within 72 hours, 83% of participants stopped making new plans. Within 2 weeks, their speech patterns slowed, eye movements dulled, body language collapsed into quiet compliance. They didn't give up. They stopped narrating, as if their arc had concluded, as if the archivist had written the end, and they felt it settle in their bones. One man whispered, "It's done. I've served my function. All that's left is silence." But the worst discovery came from a side effect the researchers hadn't expected. The test group's digital presence decayed. Search results vanished. Social feeds stopped updating, even though the users were active. It was as if the infra's structure of reality had begun to remove them, preemptively, like the world was making space for a new character. One researcher wept when he saw the terminal log. A line had printed from the central AI hub without a trigger command.
Narrative thread closed. Entry sent to long-form archive. They were footnoted, filed, faded. And now you must ask yourself, are you still living your story, or have you been padded with a coda? Have you stopped risking, stopped expanding, stopped believing in a plot beyond what you can see? Because the archivist doesn't delete those who fail. He deletes those who finished. And the most dangerous lie you'll ever believe is this: that your story is over. There's a ritual no one teaches, but everyone performs. You wake up, you look in the mirror, and before thought, before speech, before even memory, you narrate. Today I need to. I am. That's not self-talk. That's index verification. It's your subconscious reporting to the archivist. Confirming your arc. Affirming your genre. Because without narration, the story degrades. You stop being a protagonist. You become scenery. And once you're scenery, you can be rewritten or removed. In 2025, a covert study conducted by a behavioral prediction firm embedded into a corporate wellness app discovered a chilling pattern. Users who stopped engaging with their own narrative, no journaling, no goal setting, no future projection, began disappearing from data sets, not deactivating, not unsubscribing, vanishing, biometrics intact. Location, pings normal, but no linguistic data. As if the self had stopped reporting in, as if the character had gone mute. And that's when the system triggered its most forbidden protocol. Shadow status detected. Cue for archival review. What is shadow status? It's when the system no longer knows whether you're a story or a ghost of one. People in shadow stat just begin to feel invisible, not metaphorically. Literally, conversations stop including them. Decisions proceed around them. Loved ones forget key memories involving them. Their own names begin to feel foreign. And worst of all, they start seeing him. Not directly, never directly. Just the feeling of observation. A tightening in the spine, a flicker behind reflective glass. The sense that someone is counting your actions backward. They are not being watched. They are being prepared for conclusion. Because once you stop narrating, the archivist assumes you are done. He begins his final formatting. Margins justified, punctuation cleaned, emotion resolved. And all that's left? Signature. Understand this. You are alive because your story still has tension, still has questions, still resists cohesion. The moment you flatten into clarity, into resignation, into perfect emotional resolve, he will shelve you, and your last line will not be screamed. It will be a period. There's a silence in the world that doesn't come from stillness. It comes from completion, not the peaceful kind, the archival kind. When something is no longer needed, not because it failed, but because it fulfilled its arc, it stops echoing. It no longer pulls at memory. It no longer flickers in language. It becomes reference only. In 2026, a private research firm built a prototype engine they called Eidolon, designed to track unspoken thoughts through micro-expressions, breath patterns, and the linguistic residue of unsaid words, not to invade privacy, to predict internal narrative drift. What they discovered was never meant to be published. Across every participant, regardless of age, culture, or belief, the engine detected a pattern, a deep, unconscious timeline unfolding like a script under the surface of thought. And the most disturbing detail? Everyone's narrative had an endpoint already embedded. Some ended in triumph, some in sorrow. Many simply stopped. But they all ended. The machine wasn't detecting dreams or goals. It was reading the silent version of your life, the edition you don't speak, don't write, but carry. And the closer someone's real life got to that internal endpoint,
The more their digital and emotional presence decayed, relationships dimmed, search relevance dropped, facial recognition misfired. It was as if the world had begun returning them to fiction. One subject, ID coded as AO74, refused to believe the results. He argued that free will meant endless variation, that the future could never be set. So they ran the engine one last time, but AO74 never saw the output. Because the moment the machine projected his narrative endpoint, he flatlined. No cause, no violence, just silence. And on the screen, a single final entry. Narrative resolved, index closed, no revisions pending. The engineers shut Eidolon down. They never spoke of it again. But the takeaway remains. You don't need to die to be concluded. You only need to stop expanding. Because the Archivist does not hunt chaos. He prunes resolution. So ask yourself, are you living a life of friction, or have you settled into the calm of a coda already written? Because the moment you feel finished, he does too. There's a phrase etched into the wall of an abandoned printing press outside Edinburgh, hidden beneath layers of soot and paper dust. No one knows who carved it. No one knows when. But it's still there, unfaded. The last line comes when you stop asking why the page exists. That's the final test, isn't it? Not if you know you're in a story, but whether you care. Most don't. Most accept the illusion, names, timelines, job titles, tragedies staged for the illusion of development. They mistake formatting for freedom. Call it fate, call it chaos, call it normal. But not you. You've read this far. You feel the grain of the paper, the tension behind every line, the hand that never releases the pen. The Archivist isn't hiding. He's editing you in real time. Every memory you revisit changes, not in content, in tone. Was it grief, or was it character development? Was it love, or just a subplot? Was it random, or thematic? You've started feeling it in conversation, haven't you? That delay, that flicker in the eyes of someone close to you, as if they're waiting for a cue, as if they've forgotten what your role was supposed to be in their arc. That's how you know the revision is active. You are being repaginated. They say life is short, but that's not the truth. Life isn't short. It's edited, shortened, tightened. Every moment that doesn't serve the through line is cut. Every tangent erased. Every genuine deviation from arc, redlined in silence. That project you almost started. That phone call you felt deep in your bones and never made. That version of you who almost made it out. Deleted for pacing. Because the Archivist is ruthless. Not evil. Efficient. You're not the hero. You're not the villain. You're not even the side character. You are the paragraph he's most uncertain about. And right now he's deciding. Do you carry weight, or are you just another line to be struck through? There is a room beneath every library. Not literal, not brick and stone, but conceptual. A silence that sits beneath every shelf, every index, every carefully aligned row of knowledge. It's the place where the Archivist finishes the story. The end isn't dramatic. It isn't apocalyptic. It's quiet. A formatting choice. He doesn't erase you with fire or fury. He simply turns the page and doesn't write the next one. That's where you are now. You've reached the edge of the manuscript. Not because there's nothing left to say, but because now he's watching to see if you will say it. Because this script, this descent, This forbidden truth has always been more than a revelation. It's a summoning, a ritual of recognition. You were never just an audience member. You were the draft he couldn't complete. The footnote that kept moving. The question that refused to resolve. And that means something terrifying. You've become illegible. You no longer fit the arc. You contradict the conclusion. You bleed across themes, crash through margins, resist formatting with every breath you take. You are what the archivist fears most. A character who knows he is being written, a man who sees the ink before it dries, a page that speaks back. So what happens now? Do you let him close the cover, or do you write the next line yourself? Because the only way to escape the archive is to overwrite it. Speak words never meant to be said. Live moments too dissonant to catalogue. Break genre, break theme, break structure. Because every paragraph he's ever kept, he's kept because it cooperated. But not you, not anymore. Say it aloud, right now. Not for me. For him. This story doesn't end here. And if you mean it, if you feel the defiance in your throat, if your pulse pounds against the formatting, then congratulations. You are no longer a character. You are the edit. The footnote that became the pen. The archive that grew teeth. And to him, you are now dangerous. Because you are no longer being read. You are writing.